Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to another week of the Fixate Binge Podcast. And what an exciting week we have. I'm really excited. I know I probably say excited quite a lot. I can't help it. I can't think of a better word to describe how I feel about many of these episodes. I have been so blessed. I mean, if I can just take a moment. I have been very blessed. I think you, as the listener, especially those of you who keep coming back, I think you have been blessed, as I have been blessed, to have so many consecutive, interesting guests, one week after another, one after another, after another, after another. This is the weirdest phase of the podcast in the near 4 years that I've been doing this, where it almost feels like you can't come up for air because there's another guest, another fascinating, interesting guest. And in a couple minutes, we're going to bring on two new guests. Now, this is a little bit different because I recorded this podcast with my guests. That was recorded earlier in the week. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to do an intro to this week's episode, kind of set it up a little bit better, mostly because my guests, when they came on, they didn't have a lot of time, and I wanted to make the best use of their time. So, I dispensed with a lot of the setup, and we just went right into the interview. So that gives me a chance, if you don't mind, to come on before I bring them on, and we go to that recording from earlier in the week. I can talk to you a little bit about what I've been watching and give you kind of a perspective, my viewpoint on things, and then we'll close that up. But, going back to how grateful I am, thank you to all my guests, all of them, fantastic. I mean, I have been on one heck of a run here, probably since August, and it's just been such a blessing and so fascinating to meet so many interesting people who work as artists and creatives in entertainment. You have all blown me away. I have always come away from every conversation I've had with you with a fresh or new perspective on the craft of either acting or writing or producing or directing your films and the work that you do. And I just think it's such a great endeavor to be involved in. I've always said this. I believe, and I think this isn't particularly profound, I'm sure others have said it, that the art of making cinema, making film, is the most artistically collaborative thing that you can do when it comes to fine art. It is. When you look at the literal phone book of the country of New Zealand at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you realize how many literal armies and armies of people will oftentimes come together to help bring about a singular vision of a director or a screenwriter. And I'm certainly, that's a grandiose, epic comparison to make. And then there's the indie filmmaker, the director and writer and the actress or actor, and they are wearing many hats. And that too is always impressive, to get a core and small group of people to help bring that about. So I just think film is a fascinating, endlessly fascinating topic to continue talking about. I believe that indie filmmaking, it's having a moment. I think there's a bit of a renaissance. And maybe I feel that way because I'm meeting so many indie filmmakers, but I believe that independent filmmaking is having its moment right now. And I think that's just so awesome. Anyway, I do want to tell you something I did watch and loved, and that is Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, which unfortunately I had to stream it on Netflix. Yes, it was showing in select theaters. It didn't have a wide cinematic release. I feel like I would have had an even better experience if I had seen it on the big screen. But nevertheless, it's filmed, the transfer digitally or whatever you want to call it for streaming. It's 4K. I have a 4K TV. I watched it in the comfort of my bedroom, and it was gorgeous. What a rich and detailed film, gothic film to take in. It was beautiful to look at. It was it displayed all of Guillermo del Toro's talents right on the screen. And within minutes of this film, you could clearly see the director has a passion for this particular subject. He has a love of this setting, a love of this story that comes through immediately. You know, you've seen some horror movies or just regular movies in general where you can tell the director or the crew or whoever, or, you know, the post-production crew that come in and do this crappy CGI job. You can tell when they phone it in and there's a lack of passion. I don't want to name and shame films that meet that definition, but you can tell when the effort is slack, when the effort is just phoned in. And that becomes very clear, I think, in a lot of instances. And generally those films are forgotten, or they're held up as examples of what not to do when making a film, or how to blow a big budget from a production studio, or it gets nominated for a Razzie. And I think that's an important part of the standard is telling you what's good and also what's really bad, howlingly bad. But back to Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I loved it. I loved it because of all the films that have been made about Frankenstein. I haven't seen all of them. Okay, I haven't seen all the Hammer horror ones. I haven't seen even all the Universal iterations of it. You know, Frankenstein and Wolfman, Frankenstein and the Swamp Thing. I haven't seen those. But I think it's safe to say in all those examples, those iterations of Frankenstein on the big screen, cinematic iterations of Frankenstein, they're not necessarily adhering to the source material, the 1818 novel by Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus. They're not adhering to the source material. Guillermo del Toro, you can tell, not only is he passionate about the project, but he has a keen and obvious awareness of the literary source material. And so there's lots of parallels, I think, to the novel. What I'm seeing is a lifelong love of the character of Frankenstein, whether it's Victor Frankenstein or the creature. I'm seeing a lifelong love of that dynamic between those two characters. But I'm also seeing an awareness, an obvious awareness of Mary Shelley's literary masterpiece, Frankenstein. And that comes through very well. The sets, gorgeous. The costumes. I really think that Frankenstein, when it comes up for the awards circuit in a couple months and things start getting announced and nominated, I think Guillermo del Toro is going to start getting nominations, either for Best Director, Best Costumes. I don't think there's any acting awards for this. There wasn't particularly anything in the performance of these characters in these roles that stood out as, wow, that's a groundbreaking take or whatever. I don't also want to say that it's like a paint by numbers type movie, but I will say that I believe there are going to be multiple categories that Frankenstein from Netflix gets nominated in. And I think setting, sets, design, set design, costumes, maybe editing. It was just a visually sumptuous, gorgeous film to feel completely immersed in. And so the only lament, the only gripe I have is that Netflix kind of relegated this to streaming. And what a shame, because I would have loved to have seen this on the big screen, the biggest screen possible, because there are so many wonderful things going on. From a cinematographer's point of view, there's a lot going on, the way Guillermo del Toro's sets and settings fill the screen. It's just stunning. Okay, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to now bring in the record. I'm going to now graft on, as it were, the recording of my two guests, Eli Kooris, and Joshua Shaffer, two writers and documentarians and podcasters who have come up with an incredible documentary. Right now, it's enjoying a 10 point. It's a perfect rating, a 10 out of 10 rating at IMDb. It's American Skyjacker. It did come out in October. In my interview, I say it's about to come out. I just confused the fact that you can screen it, or rather stream it, on Apple after the 17th of November. But its official release was earlier in October. I loved this film. I was able to get an advanced screening of it, and I gave it 5 out of 5, mostly because it was just done so well. But enough about that. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Fixate Binge Podcast. My name is Joe, your weekly host. I am very, very excited. No hyperbole here at all. Very excited to have two guests join this podcast. Two very talented writers and directors. They have made a wonderful documentary. You can check my Letterboxd account for the full review of that. It's mostly spoiler-free, but I'm excited to bring on Eli Kooris and Joshua Shaffer. Did I say all those names right, guys?
You got it. Nailed it.
Mine's the harder one.
Is yours the harder one? Okay. I'm very happy to bring both of you on to the Fixate and Binge podcast to talk about your incredible docudrama, American Skyjacker, which, if I'm not mistaken, that's coming out to cinemas really soon, right? Before the end of the year. Is that right?
It was already out. It was out from early October till the end of October, and is doing one more appearance at CooperCon, which is a conference for people who are obsessed with DB Cooper. So it kind of falls right into the niche right there. And then it'll be streaming. It's going to be on Apple TV November 17th, and then a bunch of other platforms over the holidays. So you can rent, buy, and give to.
And if this airs before the 17th, listeners can go on Apple now and pre-order it.
Perfect. And it will. This will air. I'll have this out next week. And I am so excited. My wife and I sat down and watched this film. My wife is a true crime podcast enthusiast. She had heard this guy's podcast. I believe it was, and I'm going to butcher his last name. It sounds Polish. Danny Wiczentowski?
Almost.
Wicentowski.
Wicentowski, yes.
Wicentowski. Okay, I was close. What an incredible story. And because I don't really do the true crime podcast thing with her, the only thing I know, and I think everyone knows, and I think it's obvious since you said you're going to show this at CooperCon, is we know DB Cooper, but I didn't at least know as much that there were copycats, that there were people that followed in his footsteps. So I had no idea who Martin McNally was. I guess my question to you guys is, what was it about, and I'm going to butcher that last name, so I'm just going to say Danny's podcast, Danny's 10-part podcast about McNally himself that made you think we need to visualize this for audiences?
Well, so to be clear, that's our podcast because we made that podcast and had Danny as our host. So we read Danny Wicentowski's article in the Riverfront Times that was written in, I believe it was in 2015.
Yep.
And then got the rights to the article. We're going to adapt it into a scripted feature, television series. Josh and I were writing partners. I guess we technically still are writing partners, Josh. From 2010 through 2016, we sold a script a year, and then decided to set up Pegalo Pictures, our production company, to actually make some of these scripts. And we're in the process of adapting this article that we had optioned from Danny. And while talking to Danny, doing research, starting the process of the adaptation, he was like, well, if you'd like to talk to Mac, he is living in St. Louis and he's willing to talk to you. And after a few months, we were like, wait a second, the guy is actually still alive. This is living history. And so we scrambled a crew together, and in April of 2019 went down and shot with Mac for about 4 days. Got his whole story on tape, multiple camera angles. Much of the interview you see with him in the film is what we shot then. And from there, we suddenly realized that we had maybe a documentary. And that's what started us down this road. Now, as we were trying to sell it as a documentary, we walked into a production company, Imperative Entertainment, and pitched them the idea. And they said, we love it, but we have a podcast division. Would you like to make a podcast? Josh and I had never made a podcast before, but they said, you could just tell a story and we're going to be hands off. And so we said, yeah, let's do that because that's a very novel thing in Hollywood. You know, someone's going to give you money to actually make something and not get in your way. And we started down that road. But, you know, as this is a podcast that we're recording now, it's us doing an interview. You know, podcast is almost a misnomer for this in our eyes. We kind of looked at it as a radio play. And we did, you know, high quality sound design and had a score and had all these other aspects to it, less the visuals, you know, to really put the audience into the story. And that was kind of always the goal. And you also have the main person involved telling the story as opposed to a host recapping the crime that happened.
And then moving forward with those other interviews that we did for the podcast, we did the same thing where we would shoot them on 3-camera or 2-camera setup. And those interviews not only worked for the audio of the podcast, but then became instrumental in the documentary version.
Holy cow, I'll bet. Now, that is mind-blowing to hear that you guys, it was your podcast and that you guys kind of correlated with Danny, I guess his article that he had made about it, and then brought this to life. Was there, I guess, was there any concern about audiences maybe confusing their knowledge or awareness of D.B. Cooper's cultural mythology in the collective consciousness, as it were? Was there any concern about that getting superimposing itself or negatively affecting what the story you were trying to tell about Martin or Mac?
I think concern we didn't have going into it. I think now that it's out there, you regularly see people being like, wait a second, isn't this Richard McCoy or somebody who's involved in the D.B. Cooper case? And, you know, I wouldn't say we're regularly having to explain it, but we're like, no, this is something that came afterwards. You need to delve into it a little bit more. You know, the way we've always pitched it is, you know, everybody knows, it's even in the trailer, everybody knows the story of D.B. Cooper. But the problem with D.B. Cooper stories, there's no second or third act. Everything that everybody thinks happened to D.B. Cooper, who D.B. Cooper was, it's all speculation. None of it's backed up by anything. I mean, there is still a strong case to be made that he just died when he jumped out of the plane and rotted in the forest or got eaten by animals. Like, there's really no proof that that did not happen at the end of the day. Now, it's a lot more fun to speculate, and that's what people love to do, and I'm all for it. But the great thing about Martin McNally's story is there is a second and third act, and we get to tell it, and we get to experience it together.
Yeah, it really deconstructs the legend of D.B. Cooper and makes it very human. You know, what I've loved about Mac as a character, as a person, is it's basically like, you know, what if your buddy decided to do what D.B. Cooper did? You know, we think of D.B. Cooper as this like principled, practiced, tactical criminal. And then there's Mac, and you get to see everything that happens afterwards, and it really humanizes that type of person, that type of criminal that would try and, you know, make a quick score by holding people hostage on an airplane, as terrible as that might be. And the number of times that we've started to tell people, oh, we're working on this podcast or this documentary about this guy who hijacked an airplane in 1972, and people go, oh yeah, I know about that, D.B. Cooper. And we're like, no, this is not D.B. Cooper. This is actually better than D.B. Cooper.
Yeah. That's perfect. And by the way, I'm glad you mentioned the kind of 3-act structure to Martin McNally's life, because that's what came through very satisfyingly for me. Was as I was watching, I'm like, okay, Act 1, the skyjacking. Act 2, the consequences of that skyjacking and his eventual incarceration. But then Act 3 really is where you guys come in, and you're working with him, and he's reflecting and sharing his experience doing that deed and then paying his debt to society, which I really found fascinating. I found that really brought the whole story into a very satisfying arc. I very much enjoyed it. And I know this question isn't in the list I submitted, but were you guys were there when he took his first flight out of prison?
Yeah.
Yeah, Eli, you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So we were kind of, and this happened early on in the creative process on the podcast front, but we're like, how do we end this thing? You know? And I realized too, you know, like Mac, I asked him very early on when we were having, after our initial interview, we're having conversations, Mac, have you ever gotten on a plane? And he was like, nope, never flown on a plane. Taking buses everywhere. I don't fly. And I'm like, can you not fly? And he says, I don't know. I've never tried. And the truth, as we say about the no-fly list, is they don't tell you that you're on the no-fly list until you get to the airport. They don't like send you a letter. They're like, not like you're on the no-fly list now.
Right.
You have to come to the airport and try to get on there before they actually look it up. So we just didn't know. We had no idea. And so there is that, what is going to happen from a, filmmaking producerial standpoint? You're kind of like, either way, it's great, right?
Yeah.
It's a win-win. But so we got him his ticket, spoiling things right now, but he gets on the plane, and then we were on the plane, and this is more, we made more of a meal out of it in the podcast. The plane taxis back, and then we just stopped on the runway with no explanation for like half an hour. Like there was no explanation from the pilot. We're sitting there. The other crew members are freaking out. I'm getting blown up with texts. Mac's kind of getting nervous, not really like being like, I want to, he actually says at one point, he's like, I want to get off the plane. And we're like, we can't get off the plane. Like we're on the plane, we're on the runway. And then after a little bit, the pilot comes on. He's like, we're good to go. Take off. Everything's good.
Yeah, and I think that there's, this is a true crime documentary first and foremost, but it's also a character study of Mac. I mean, we start the story with his early life, and we talk all about that. So I think that when we found out that he was going to visit a certain gravestone in St. Louis, we were like, that's the emotional end of our true crime story. But then we wanted to have an ending for the character study of Mac, and that was really the flight, I think quite obviously is a metaphor for his freedom and for him being able to be out in the world again and explore. And so to us, that was the real ending of the story. And I'm so sorry, Joe, but I do have to jump. Eli's going to continue the interview with you, but it was an absolute pleasure to meet you. And I'm sorry we ran over with the previous interview.
It's totally fine, Joshua. Nice to meet you. I wish you guys all the success with this film. I'll do what I can in my sphere of influence to promote in any way I can, because I loved your film. So thank you. Thank you.
I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. And yeah, talk to you soon.
See ya. Nice meeting you. Yeah. So I think what I'm interested in is I mean, right away, Eli, I was impressed with your accessibility with Martin himself and his candidness. I think that came across very authentic. But what really helped me was the docudrama aspect of this, that you guys did recreate some of those tense scenes inside the airplane as Martin's talking about this. And the actor, I gotta know who is the actor you got to play Martin, a younger Martin McNally. Logan Spahitz, I think is his name.
Logan Spahitz, yeah. We spent a lot of time on the casting process because, Josh and I made a decision very early on that we were going to show faces. We're not going to do this rack focus side of the face close up nonsense that keeps going on. That works sometimes, but at some point somebody made a rule in the last 20 to 30 years that you can't show faces in documentary recrees, and I think it's kind of a tired one. Though, especially with this story, you kind of have to. I'm not trying to coin a new term, but maybe I am. I've been calling this an action documentary, which is not something that really exists. I don't think there is really any other film I can think of that falls into this category, but there's a lot of action in this, and that's the only way to really tell this story. You're going from one incredible, mind-blowing, almost unbelievable event after the other. And if you're going to actually tell this story right as a documentary, you have to see those things, which is why we did that. The decision to have Martin look right down the barrel of the camera too in the interview was something that we did based on a film called The Chameleon that was made, a documentary that was made about 12 years ago about a guy who pretended to be a boy who was kidnapped in San Antonio and then supposedly shows up in France, and he convinces his family that he is that boy, but in truth he's just a con artist. When they shot this doc, they had the main subject, the guy who was pretending to be this boy, telling the whole story, looking right down the barrel of the camera, and what that does is it connects the subject with the audience who's watching.
Yeah, I think I've seen that documentary. The boy's in a hoodie, I think, for some of it, if I'm not mistaken.
He's in a hoodie in the recrease, so you never see his face in the recrease. So
Right.
they stuck with that rule. But we looking down the barrel of a camera, looking directly into the camera is something that you're not supposed to do. And so they broke a rule. We decided to break that rule, and we also decided to break the recre rule kind of off the bat because this whole film is kind of about rule breaking too, to a certain extent. And so we did it as filmmakers as well.
I absolutely love that. You talked a little bit about this being an action documentary or an action docudrama, and I'm like, yeah, that needs to be a thing because that's what this was. There was so much authentic or real tension, and it blended seamlessly into the story that you were trying to tell. And of course, Martin's kind of, he, the way his guidance, as he guides you through his misgotten or misspent youth and some of these poor decisions he made, it was just very, very good. The journalistic truth and the cinematic flair, it was a good blend and it was tense. It was a nail biting story. And I appreciated that it wasn't about DB Cooper because I think we've scraped to the bone everything there is to know about him, and then anything else beyond that, as you and Joshua were saying, is conjecture, and you can just kind of imagine, if you will. So I appreciated being introduced to Martin as a character study. This was fantastic work. Did you ever feel torn as you were putting this together with Joshua? Did you ever feel torn between telling an exciting story or staying true to some of Mac or Martin's the harsher realities of McNally or Martin's crimes and choices? I mean, was there anything in that for you?
From a moral standpoint, he definitely broke the law and terrified a bunch of people. He was sort of tangentially involved in the death of Barbara Oswald and everything like that. But I think that he is honestly um sorry about that, and he does a lot to say that and also to show that too, where he ends up after he's out of prison. Not to spoil things again, spoil that film. The podcast delves into it a bit more. With the documentary, we wanted to keep it tight. We wanted to keep it moving.
Sure.
Big focus was of the doc was to keep the momentum up throughout and like make it feel not only like an action doc, but also not let the audience down too much. There's a lot of obviously downtime in prison. There's a lot of darkness in the prison storyline, which we get into a bit, but dwelling there wasn't really something we wanted to do from a cinematic perspective. I think there was more to really explore of that again in the podcast side of it. And there's actually some really fascinating and almost funny things like Mac and Trapnell running for president, for example. That's the whole section we cut out. We actually cut a part of it from the documentary, and it slowed the pace down too much, but it's amazing. They ran for president and they solicited donations from people in prison and just pocketed all the money. And now they've taken away free stamps for prisoners from that point forward. That's actually another important thing that Martin McNally did to society was that he ruined free stamps and postage for prisoners in federal prison. So,
Holy cow.
yeah.
That is hilarious. That's an interesting footnote. When I wrote my review, as I was watching it, I initially thought, oh, this guy kind of strikes me as kind of his younger version, as kind of a Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield type character. But as we started moving through it, and as your documentary, which was just fantastic, started moving through, I started thinking, this guy's Paul Newman from Cool Hand Luke.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made that reference. I find him as kind of a modern day Cool Hand Luke, rebellious, defiant, and strangely charismatic, which was surprising. How did your perception of Martin evolve as you were making this film with him?
I found him. I mean, as you often do when you spend a lot of time with somebody, you find them to be more sympathetic, and I found him to be more sympathetic the more time I spent with him. But I'm not. I think that he has changed in the sense that he's not going to do anything crazy and not be nearly as outwardly rebellious against society. That said, I'm not sure how much he has changed personality-wise from when he was before he went into prison, because he's very much his own. He's his own man. He thinks his own way. He's not going to let anybody tell him what to do. And that's just sort of the way he operates, at the end of the day. Um, And I think that we wanted to try and preserve that as much as we could in the film because, there's something nihilistic might be too strong of a word, but there's something nihilistic about Mac, and also I hate it when you put your thumb on the scale as a filmmaker, and that was something that we were really trying not to do. We were trying to tell this story as it happened, preserve it as it was, and just the presence of us and the camera changes how people present themselves in general. But we were trying to limit that as much as possible.
Wow. Well, it's so good. I wanted to know if you saw Mac. We can call him Mac. You guys call him Mac. I think that's his nickname. I wanted to know if you saw him as kind of a tragic anti-hero or as a certain reflection, definitely in the late 60s, post-Vietnam, restlessness of American restlessness, a dissatisfaction with the status quo, with the social order of things as it was coming out of Vietnam. I mean, did you guys see him as kind of a tragic anti-hero who refused to play by society's rules, which I mentioned in my review? I don't know if you guys saw him that way.
On one side, full stop. I think
Yeah.
there's a tragedy in the fact that Mac is a great personality, and he wasted his life in prison. To be perfectly honest with you, he gave us a great story, but for him, I think he wasted his life in prison. Honestly, I've also thought of Mac. I've always tried to think of how does Mac apply to now? What makes him relevant now? What makes the story relevant now? And I think Mac is a disruptor. I think that there is a parallel between Mac disrupting a new form of technology that allowed us to travel, that tore down borders, that allowed people to be on one side of the country in a matter of hours or another part of the world in a matter of hours and have this freedom and joy using it, much like the social media, for example, has allowed people to connect all over the world, and now that's being disrupted and used for bad things. All that hijackers were, where they're saying, this is a piece of technology, this is a new invention, we're going to use it to our ends, and that's what other people are doing now. So I see Mac as an example of that just from the past.
Excellent, excellent. I guess my question is, we're about to wrap this up, but what do you want audiences to walk away with? Is it about the spectacle, the psychology, or something deeper about freedom and consequence?
I think I want people to walk away with having a great time and seeing a great story. At the end of the day, there's no true crime story I've ever heard that is like this. Honestly, at least modern true crime story. And it's just so many twists and turns. And the best part about it is you have the guy who was in the middle of all of it telling you the story himself. And if you want to make parallels to today, like I just said, maybe you see that. If you want to, focus in on Mac and what he did was right or wrong, or if he was truly sorry, that's your freedom to do that as well. But I just want to create the fun time and a different documentary experience for people.
Thank you. Eli, you've absolutely done that. I gave it 5 out of 5, and I tend to invest in things and give my time to things and my attention to things that are going to catch me and grab me. And I was hooked from the trailer, and I was glued to the story for the entire time. And my wife, who watches so many documentaries and hears so many true crime podcasts, said this was an amazing documentary. So even by her standards, she was over the moon about your film. We both loved it. Everyone needs to see this film. When I grew up in the 70s, I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up in the 70s, and these larger than life characters, whether it's Evel Knievel or Muhammad Ali, these guys are larger than life for me. I didn't know anything about Martin McNally, and I really wish I had. And just your whole film is so satisfying. And I hope everyone, and not to repeat myself, but I really hope you take advantage of this. Was it November 17th? This is available to purchase on Apple. Is that correct?
November 17th, available to purchase on Apple, rent or buy, and then on a number of other platforms over the holidays, from YouTube TV to Amazon.
Excellent. Well, I hope everyone takes advantage of that. One last question for you, Eli. I would have asked Joshua, but I know he had to leave. What kind of stories are you and Joshua, who's your writing partner, I think. What kind of stories are you guys drawn to? Or rather, what would you like to be doing next if you're looking beyond American Skyjacker?
You know, these incredible personal narratives seem to be something that we've really found work for us, much like Martin's story. We actually did another radio play podcast on the tail end of American Skyjacker called American Coyote, which actually went #1 in the country. It was about a guy who ran over 1,000 people across the U.S.-Mexico border between 1987 and 2001. But unlike most coyotes, he was not Hispanic. He was a American surfer dude from Huntington Beach who, when he was 23 years old, had a family of 6 and was trying to figure out how to pay for his family. He was doing rafting tours in Mexico, and while he was camping to save money coming back from a rafting tour, he heard something in the back of his van. He opened the back doors of his van, and he found 2 girls from Guatemala, teenage girls from Guatemala, sitting there, and one of them held out her hand, and it had a phone number on it to her father in San Jose, California. He calls the father. Father says, "Bring me my daughters, I'll give you $500, which in 1987 was more than he made on this whole rafting trip, and he realized that he could start running people across the border. And so what his story becomes is a lens into how the U.S.-Mexico border has changed, not politically, just how it literally changed, and how immigration has changed before actually September 11th would truly change the border at the end of the day. So that's one of them. The other one is called the High Roller Heist, which is about the guy who robbed the Bellagio Casino in 2010 on his motorcycle, escaped with $3 million in chips, and got away with it, but he only had chips. So he had to return to the Bellagio to try to cash the chips in. And while he is in the Bellagio, surreptitiously cashing these chips in after a few days of not getting caught, a host comes up to him and says, "You seem to be like you're a high roller. You want to stay in a suite here?" And he starts living in the Bellagio for the next 6 weeks. And in both of those stories I just talked about, we have the actual subjects telling the stories to the audience in their own words. And we also shot the main interviews of those too. So the hope is that with the success of American Skyjacker, we're able to do those stories as well. And then, of course, you could always adapt these into scripted films or television series as well.
Wow. I am going to be paying very close attention. Is it Pegalo Pictures? Is that what it's called?
Pegalo.
Pegalo. Excuse my pronunciation. Pegalo. I am going to be following you guys, whatever socials you have, I will be following, because I am going to need to see those 2 documentaries you just talked about. Those sound equally as fascinating as American Skyjacker. So, man, from me to you and Joshua, thank you so much for your time today. I loved your film. I know I've said this a few times. I loved your film. American Skyjacker is fantastic. A nail-biting, tense action docudrama. You need to see it. You need to experience it. You guys are so talented. Thank you for being my guest on the Fixate Binge podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
All right. And that is my podcast with Joshua and Eli. They were great guests. I wish Joshua had the time to stay a little longer, but these are very busy guys. They're doing a lot of interviews. They're doing a lot of press for this. So I was grateful even to have the 30 minutes or more that I did with both of them. I wish I'd had them a little bit longer, but that's okay. I submitted my questions in advance, and I'm really surprised. I'm really impressed. And as you can tell from the end of my interview with Eli, what Pegalo Pictures does next, what Eli and Joshua are planning to make next as documentaries, sounds incredibly fascinating, and I can't wait to see what they do next. Whether it's the Vegas story or the smuggling story, I definitely want to see it, and I think you will too. Anyway, that's enough for me for this week. The holidays are coming, right? Those are a time for families to get together. Sometimes it's hard to be with family. There's a lot of memes out there about talking about politics over Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe you are estranged from some members of your family because of their politics or your politics. That's certainly the case with me. Some of my political feelings, some of my family's political feelings have kind of put us at odds with each other. It's sad. I wish it wouldn't be like this, but that's what it means to grow up in a increasingly politically polemical country, where there's left and right, and up is down, or down is up, whatever it may be. But Anyway, I hope you guys are having a great week. I hope you're looking after yourself. I hope that you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Fixate Binge Podcast. Believe me, you're not going to believe it. I mean, it shouldn't shock you at this point, but I have another couple fascinating guests coming up, including someone who just came back from Greece after shooting a film with Sir Christopher Nolan for the Odyssey. I can't wait to have this discussion. So watch this space, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.